Okay, so we're going to talk about, like I said, we're going to talk about today how to support your students' transition to college. So this chat is geared more for senior parents, but if you are a parent of a junior, sophomore, or freshman, it's never too early to begin to talk about how to support your student through transition. The transition from high school to college is a big one, and it may or may not be the biggest transition your student has had to go through thus far. So it's really important to understand how to support them and how to help them through this major life change. So graduating high school and moving on to a higher ed experience and moving on to college, whether it be home or away, is a really exciting thing. It's a huge accomplishment. Students are really excited about it. But what's not spoken enough about is like, what does that transition actually mean for students? Um, as parents and educators, it's also hard to understand how to help that change because it's something that some of us may have never been through either. So today we're going to kind of go through some points. And again, feel free if you have any questions during the chat, just feel free to use the Q&A box and I'll get to as many as I can. So the first thing that I want to talk about is embracing the change and, to continue to teach. You know, so most of our students, we have taught, for 17, 18 years, how to be students, how to be humans. And then mostly they've lived under, your roof. So this is going to be a change for you. It's going to be a change for them. But talking about the change, even having those open conversations. So some of those open conversations started to happen. And if you've watched my webinar about how to start talking about, for a junior parent, how to start talking about the conversation of college, some of these points are very similar. So having that open conversation, it could work for a lot of different things, but in this case, having that open conversation about change. So what does the change look like? Is your student moving to maybe a different region in the US? Will the weather be different? Our class size is going to be larger. Did we make a decision yet on a college? Some of these conversations right now are probably still, where is the student going to attend? Because not everyone has made a decision. Not everyone has even heard back from all of their colleges yet. So just really starting to talk about what does the student think the change is going to look like and what you think the change is going to look like. And I think normalizing that it is going to be a big transition is very helpful for the student. So I think part of the transition also is, in the grand scheme of change, is in the higher ed level, students have, whether they're home or away, and there's a whole different set of things if the student is going away to college. But what does their responsibilities look like? And what does the newfound independence look like? So college looks very differently from high school. High school, the student is expected to be here every day from this time to this time, and college is not like that. So college, you could go some days without classes. You could have classes if you're not a morning person at 4 p.m. in the afternoon. So talking about and navigating what those responsibilities look like and navigating what that new independence looks like. So I think that's really helpful to just start the transition conversation. How does your student do that? What does that look like if you don't have a class all day? Do you study? Do you work? Are you a part of clubs? Just laying that framework that it's going to be different. So the other thing that I love about starting transition conversations is your students have learned so much from you all. Your students have learned so much while here at Schreiber, just in the Fort Washington district. So telling them and letting them know that they're equipped to handle all of these challenges. I think sometimes just hearing that we know it's going to be a challenge, we know there's going to be change, but you can do it, is really helpful to the student. And, even if it seems that it's not setting in right now, when they're going through that change, that conversation probably will really resonate with them and they'll remember it. So that's just starting the, transition conversation, laying the groundwork for what's to come in the coming months. So I think another important thing to realize is change is always going to equal stress, even if it's good change. And like I said before, these are great things that we're talking about. The student graduating high school, the student moving on to a higher ed sphere where they have more independence, more freedom. Maybe they are, finally studying what they want to study because this is what they want to do with their career and their life. All good things. But there's still going to be an adjustment period. There's still going to be stress in that transition time. And I think what I talked about like a little bit before is normalizing that stress. So I think sometimes, students think when they go off to college, everything's going to be really great. And it is eventually, but there is that time where there is an adjustment period. And I think normalizing that for students and telling them that it's okay to feel this way, it's okay to either be anxious or excited or all the feelings in between, I think that helps the students emotionally regulate and be okay with the fact that this is good, but it is going to be stressful, and really setting the stage for it to be a realistic transition. So the next thing is really big. Obviously, like we talked about, your student's going to have more independence. They're going to have a different schedule. They're going to have different responsibilities. So something that could be helpful to a student is instilling that freedom and that trust that you have in your student. All of these things are scary, and all of these are a part of change and a part of transition. And I think that it's hard on the parent side also. So even though the student's going through the big transition and the student is the one either moving away to college or starting a new experience, as parents, there's a lot of transition on the parent side too. And I think if we could give the student that ability to advocate for themselves and tell them that, we trust in what you know, helping them be able to provide them with the opportunities so they can learn to lean on themselves. That's really helpful and empowering for a student. And especially if a student is moving away, it's really helpful for them to be able to speak up for themselves on a college campus. Because that's another, big change that you're going to see. A lot of college professors, their academic advisors, all of the support systems on campus are going to want to talk to the student and are going to want the student to advocate for themselves. So if we could begin instilling that in students now and saying, we trust in your ability to do that, it's really going to help students in the future in their college journey. So with that being, the transition, and like we talked about, you will also, go through some transition as well. I think it's important for you and your student to all be on the same page. So I talked a lot about so far having the student, finding their new independence and advocating for themselves and normalizing that stress and new freedom. But I think what we don't talk enough about is, and it goes back to that open conversation, but sharing, what you all think. So you're going through a transition as well. Even having a conversation with a student, sitting down and saying, like, what do you want to see in this change? So, how do you want your college experience to go? What do you want to do academically? And, really let the student share what their vision is for their college years. And they may or may not know, right? Because the college process is such a big undertaking and they just went through it. So they may not have thought ahead to what they want their college experience to look like. So this conversation could take two shapes. Either the student knows exactly what they want to do, or the student says, hey, I haven't really thought about it, but it's that gateway to open that door to tell the student, okay, we've made it through, we've made a decision on a college. Now let's really think about what you're going to do or what you want to accomplish when you're in college. And I think what this allows is for you as parents, for you as, educators to your students, I think it allows you to then share what you want to see for your students, and really have that conversation about, what you want to see for the student, what your student feels they want to see for themselves in the college. And I think, meeting maybe somewhere in the middle, or just having those discussions on points that where you don't maybe agree. And it just really opens that communication barrier. If you haven't, um, gotten that already, communication is going to thread its way through the transition piece. Open communication with your student, and with each other is really going to fuel the college transition, and it's really going to fuel the success of the transition. So just something to keep in mind as, we're continuing to talk about these different points. So the next thing is, just talking together. So, and this kind of threads from sharing what you care most about. So when the student gets to college, or even before they get to college, talking about, life events, what is their financials going to look like? What are they going to do for money when they get on campus? Are they going to get a campus job? Are they not going to work? Are they going to be part of a sports team? Are they going to be part of a club sport, extracurriculars? What does that experience look like? How are you going to manage with the student travel? What is that going to look like? Are students only going to come home for major life events? And what are major life events considered? Are they only going to come home from breaks? Are they going to come home for a weekend once a month? So all of these things can be spoken about before they go to that campus, because I think it provides the student with a clear picture of what is expected of them. And it also provides, you as parents and supporters, a clear picture of what the student is expecting from you. And I think that clarity piece will help students manage their time at college and understand what their expectations are for them at home as well. And that's a big piece, right? Because some of these students are leaving home for the first time, and it's going to be a challenge just to be away from home. So what is the expectation when it comes to coming home? How far away are they from home? Are you as parents, supporters, guardians going to go visit them once a month? What does that look like? I think starting that conversation, and having the conversation with them is really helpful to, talking about all the things that we've already talked about, instilling that trust, instilling that advocacy for themselves. So I think that's really helpful. So the next piece is, again, like I said, communication is we've woven through this entire topic, but having a communication plan. Right now, students come home from school every day, or they go to their extracurriculars after school, or maybe work, but then they come home at some point. And most of you probably see your students, every day, or at least a good amount of the week. And it's easy to communicate because you're either under the same roof, or you have certain days where you see your students. So the communication plan is kind of set, and it's really easy to communicate. When they go to college, like I said, their schedule is going to be very different. If they're not living at home, they're living away, they could be in a different time zone. So the communication piece becomes challenging, because a lot of the conversations that we talked about prior to this point, were about, prior to college, like setting that communication piece up, setting that transition piece up, and how does that work for students. This communication plan is really about what happens when they're at college. So some helpful things that, had worked for students in the past, that I have seen worked for students on the higher ed sphere, is having set check-ins with parents. And it seems kind of silly right now, because most of us are probably thinking, I communicate with my student on a daily basis, or at least, 3 to 4 times a week. They're going to call me. This is not going to be, difficult. But when the student is transitioning and reveling in all of that other change, and trying to figure out a new schedule, trying to figure out social events, trying to make new friends. It becomes challenging to find time to sometimes call parents and guardians. And it's not that the student doesn't care, they're just managing so many other things. So what I've seen work for college students is definitely setting a set check-in time. I had a student once who I actually worked with on the college level who at 8 p.m. every Sunday would call his parents. And it worked for them because he may have spoken to them throughout the week as well, but they always knew that time at 8 p.m. on Sundays was a time that they were going to either FaceTime or Zoom or even just talk on the phone. And it really set that student up for success because there was always that fallback that, well, I'm going to talk to them at this time. I know that. So the other portion of that communication plan is that was once a week. How often do you expect to talk to your student? And sitting down and having that realistic conversation with your student, like, do you want to talk to them every day to make sure they're okay? Is a text suffice that it's okay to just text and say, hey, how you doing? I'm good today. And what does that really look like for the student and for the student's responsibility? Now, what I will say is sometimes students and their parents or guardians and their support system make a plan before they go to college. And I highly encourage to at least start talking about the plan before, they step foot on campus. But what happens sometimes is the plan may need to change. And I think in the first couple of weeks of school, students don't really know what college is like until they get in it, until they get in the swing of things, in the swing of classes, and what does that look like? So sometimes the plan needs to change. And I think everyone on both ends needs to, be able to be flexible in that and that understanding that sometimes, things just need to change for whatever reason. So we do have a question. Could we discuss online games, social media expectations in college? I just want to clarify, like from a policy standpoint from college or just in general, like how to have the conversation with students about social media? So while I wait for you to type back, because I just want to make sure I'm answering the question appropriately. While we wait for that answer, I'll just go through our next tip. You really want to prepare them to belong. That's, I think, what everyone is hoping for when they go to college. They want to belong. And transition, like I said, it's stressful, it's scary, it's a change. But telling your student or talking with your student rather about what it's like to belong and what does it mean to belong. So and sometimes that's a hard question. Like, what does it mean to belong? But having the student be able to articulate what's important to them. So part of it is having the student articulate what's important to them here at Schreiber and what they would like to see in their college is really helpful, because if they can articulate what they're already doing here at Schreiber, sometimes it lends the conversation to what's important to them and what makes them feel like they belong in this community and can open that conversation for things to look for when they go to college. So maybe the student is a student athlete here, but they're not playing Division I, II, or III. So maybe looking to see if that college has a club team or even intramurals, and what can they get involved in because they want to make friends through that. So things like that, are they in robotics here? And does that college have a robotics team that they want to be a part of, because that's something they're proud of here and they want to continue into their college? So starting with conversations like those is really helpful to help the student understand what belonging means, but then also help them create a plan to create that belonging. And I think also normalizing the fact that this is a transition. It's a process, just like the college application process. This is also a process transitioning to college, and it's not going to feel settled or right within the first couple of days. It could take, weeks, the first month, even the first semester to really get grounded in what you're doing for a college. So hold on, let me just have the clarification. Okay, so that's a good question. So the clarification was, there's students that spend a lot of time online in college, and they feel that's okay, but then the social connections are lacking because they use online activities as a substitute. And how can you support as a support system or a parent to keep that more balanced? Um, that's a really great question. And, since the pandemic, a lot of things, online activities have been substitutes for social connections. Um, so I think it's hard, in general, to have that conversation with your student. But I think, again, going back to that woven thread of communication, I think you need to have a conversation with your student, and it may not be over the phone while they're there. It may have to be, when they come home in person to demonstrate, in-person connections, almost modeling, but, talking through with the student to ask them why why do they prefer the online activity? Because there may be a reason that the student's not sharing, that you don't know, but having that conversation about the why. And then from there, trying to find either activities on campus or helping the student explore activities on campus and extracurriculars that can give them that social connection. And then students always going to say, but why? I'm doing just fine, probably online, and I'm doing what I need to do. But then transitioning it back to, maybe what the student is majoring in. So I'm not sure in this case what the student is majoring in, but explaining why social connections in certain majors and certain jobs are so important and how they can practice them in college. And college is really a point to be able to practice and be able to help understand why they're important. So it's a tough conversation and it's going to be individualized for every student. But I think just having that open conversation of why are they using those online activities as a substitute, getting to that why is really important. And that's going to kind of propel the rest of the conversation. But I think it's also important to help them understand why social connections are important. And I think, some of that has been lost over the years through pandemic, like why they're even important. And so many things are now online, which makes it really easy for students to do things online. But having that open conversation, and I think having it in person could be really beneficial. So I hope that answered your question. So I know we're just about out of time. So I just want to, the last 2 points I think are really, really important. Validating yours and your students' feelings in the beginning of all of this. So the transition is not going to be easy. And, your students may call and say, my class is, I didn't expect this class to be this way, or, I didn't realize that I was responsible for this with the professor. And, there's going to be lots of feelings and lots of emotions running high in the beginning. And I think giving that time to your student to say, yes, but now and that's okay. That's what happens in a transition is really powerful to a student, almost giving them that okay, that this is going to be a challenge and this is going to be a learning curve and it's okay. We'll move on from it. And in that same sense, so, taking time to reflect both for you and the student. I think that's really, really powerful on both ends. And, just prompting the student to reflect, even if it's 6 weeks into the semester and they call, because there's going to be points in the semester that are really, really stressful and where emotions are running high, and just reminding the student, reflect on how far you've come since you started, and then taking time for yourself to reflect, because while the student is the one starting college and the student is the one going to a new academic setting, you play a pivotal role in their success at college. So taking time to reflect on how much you have supported that student and how much you have helped them transition to college and give yourself time, I think is so, so, so important. And the last thing I want to bring up is a lot of colleges have started doing what they're calling family connections. Some of them do it in the form of a video message once a month. Some of them do it in the form of a newsletter. Some of them do it in the form of a weekly email. Just understanding what your student campus has to offer for family connections. And most of the times what's in those videos, newsletters, or emails are what's going on on campus that week. What are the big things going on? What are the traditions going on that week? What does academics look like that week? Is it midterm week? And what I found is that really helps parents stay engaged in what's going on in college. So even if the communication is a little bit rough in the beginning with your student, you can say, hey, I read that, this is going on. Maybe you should check that out. Or I read that it's midterm week, so I know, it could be really stressful, and you could start a conversation like that. So understanding what the student is going through at that point in the college semester is really powerful. And I think that helps students feel more connected to you because you have a vested interest in what's going on in their campus. All right, so I hope this was helpful. That we are just about out of time. But thank you, and we will have another parent webinar in March. Have a great day, everyone.